Okay, hello class. I hope you guys can hear me. Um, my name is Alpha Lewis. I'll be your instructor for this course. I'd like to say welcome. Great to have you. Should be a fun 8 weeks. So we're going to have these office hours weekly. Uh, they're going to be served for dual purpose. A is to address any concerns that I can speak to the whole class about. And then B, to go over materials. So this week is rather light. We're not doing much. We're kind of getting to know each other and going over the course content and light reading. The reading this week is just a general overview on international trade. More specifically, we're looking at comparative advantage, absolute advantage, and some of the motivators that lead nations to trade. What's most important about the reading is to imagine yourself as a stakeholder along several levels. So not just as a observer with the news or sort of rhetorical thinking about why nations trade, but also consider yourself in various aspects of the economy. By that I mean supplier and the consumer. So reasons for trade, why nations decide to go into pacts, into agreements, is to benefit their economy and, and their citizens as well. So in benefiting the economy and the citizens, we're looking at different stakeholders or actors in the economy. So you'll have the suppliers, and from that angle, they can be a one-shop supplier that deals with goods or services, up to a multinational corporation that has a conglomerate of businesses underneath it and works across several territories. So that's one aspect. But then you also have consumers. So consumers can also be businesses. So if you ever heard of business to business, so that's a type of consumer. You can look at businesses that import raw materials to complete finished goods here on our territory. Right? So that would be a consumer, a business to business consumer. But we're also consumers ourselves, the individuals. So an individual that wants to go buy a TV set, a video game, banking, portfolios, and other types of services, tech services, biological services, things like that. We're also consumers, and the government has that in mind because it's part of the overall economy. So not just the supplier, but also the consumer make up the total economy, along with uh, the balance of trade as well. So that's what the reading is about. So it's a quick overview, kind of talks about absolute and comparative advantage. I might go into that a little bit at the end after I go over sort of the platform, the learning, the modality that we're going to be teaching this course in. So as you know, with the COVID situation, most courses are taught in a either hybrid or fully online modality, or modality, the way they teach it, how we're teaching it. So in our case, we're doing a asynchronous fully online course. So the term asynchronous simply means, I'm going to close this. I'm sorry about that. There's yard work happening there. So asynchronous simply means it's not simultaneously happening. By that I mean you're not checking in at a specific date and time periodically or repetitively weekly till the end of the semester. However, so that's synchronous. Asynchronous means you're not doing that, right? However, we do have due dates and check-ins. So weekly, you'll have assignments due. I'll go over that here briefly. Weekly, we'll have these office hours, as I explained not long ago, what they're served for. And in addition to that, I encourage open and frequent communication, both between peers, between the students, and also between you and I. You can do that via email. You can do that via phone. You can do that via the platforms that are inside of this Canvas LMS, Learning Management System. So there's a lot of ways to communicate. All right. So, excuse me. With that said, I am going to go over the class here. Sometimes it's hard for me to, I really think I'm sharing my screen. Let me just double check that I'm sharing my screen. I apologize for that. Okay. Yeah, I assume I'm sharing the screen. I thought there'd be like a green thing around it. In either case, so here we are. This is the landing page. This is the home page. Um, the home page will change weekly. Uh, so this is what it looks like today, because this is the first week of the class. It kind of gives you a lot of the overviews. It's got the welcome page. Scroll down quickly and show you some of the things on the page, the title. And here we have a row of links that help get you ready for the course. Okay, this start here is a link that brings you into the module. And if you've used Canvas before, you'll know the classes are broken down into modules weekly usually. And so is this one. So each week, there are different tasks and functions that need to be completed to be able to say that you've completed that module. And here, that Start Here button or link, that gets you into the first row of the module, and then you linearly or sequentially go down the task until you get to the summary or the end of the week. I'll show you a visual of that later on. And then next is the syllabus. We'll go over that as well. Module, course roadmap. So the course roadmap is telling you the topics of the course, right? So you'll have a heading that you saw in your syllabus with the email I sent you. But the roadmap just gives you a little brief description as to what's involved in each one of those sections. Student support, Canvas student training. So these are sort of stock packages that the campus has put together to assist you in knowing where you need to go to get help in your journey. And then the Canvas student training, again, it's a package that shows the most common questions and the most common videos to help you navigate this learning management system or LMS. Okay, if you scroll down, brief introduction to the course, this notion of a ZTC or zero textbook cost, that means there's no textbook that you purchase. However, there's what they call a course reader. So the course reader is a textbook, but you don't pay for it. It's right there. You just click on that link. It brings you to a PDF. I believe it's 161 pages. It has everything you need that follows through the course. You can have that textbook or that reader printed out at the library. So just go, I need my reader printed out from IBUS 100, and you'll have a hard copy version. And then now we have a brief tutorial about the LMS again, Canvas, because it's important if there's like a mechanical disruption to the learning, then it sort of obfuscates, it takes away from the learning experience. So we don't want mechanical issues, i.e., not knowing where to find this or don't understand what this is leading to, why is this link? We don't want that to disrupt the learning. And so that's what this brief video is about. Next, we have the Start Here button. Again, it's similar to the previous Start Here button that I showed a minute ago. And my contact here, so my email and my phone number. Just allow me 24 hours. I usually get to it quicker than that. All right, so now let's take a look over here on the right-hand side. This is your to-do. So this is populated weekly. And I believe this is about 2 weeks of to-do, and it just shows you all of your assignments, right? There are these icons next to the links that help explain what your assignment is, right? So you see this little bullhorn that's letting you know it's an announcement. So I had to post an announcement today. I had a couple of meetings, and so I had to post an announcement that drove the office hours here. So I hopefully you guys saw that. I didn't frustrate anybody by not being there at the 12 o'clock. I just couldn't do it. But I will give a notice each time, okay? Again, another announcement. All right, here, this one here, this is a calendar. This is announcing this office hour, 2 p.m. discussion. These are your weekly discussions here. It's due on the 24th. So now I want to go over that quickly, and I'll go in more details later. So the discussion is a very important part of how we're going to maintain active learning. So active learning is this theory or this hope or idea that we can take this online space and create cogent, active, dynamic discussions. And in order to do that, we need feedback from all actors, all stakeholders, you and I combined. And this is one of the tools that we're going to be using, the discussion thread. So although it's due the 24th, it's due the 24th because each discussion has two parts to it. So there's the responding to the discussion prompts or questions, and then there's responding to your classmates' response to the prompts or questions. And both those aspects are graded, and they're essential in creating what we call dynamic discussion or an emergent learning experience, where we're piggybacking off the last discussion that we have, and we're not starting from fresh every week. So by with communication, that's how we make things more dynamic and more more organic and livable, right? Like it's actually going on. We have a pre-course assessment, and you see this little icon here. And basically that is just for me to get a good understanding of previous classes, your digital literacy in terms of these platforms, computer in general, the topic that we're dealing with, and other things, so that we can gauge what's your mechanical and what's your theoretical understanding of this online space we're about to tackle here. And then we have the readings. I talked about that earlier, why we trade. And then here now we're heading into the following week. So that is what that is. That's the to-do. Here in the middle are announcements. So your announcements will populate here. And here we got MLA formatting using Word and Google. We got videos about MLA. We've got Microsoft Access for students, and this is me talking about the time change. So these MLA formats are important because you'll be writing papers, right? We're at college, we're writing papers, and so these papers they're not extensive. We're not doing 20 pages or 12 pages. We're not doing that, but we are doing pages. We are going to be professional students when we do this. So that means we're not going to be doing like a social media post or something like that, right? We're going to have all of the formatting that's involved in doing a paper. And why is that? Because your argument usually is predicated on your presentation. So if your presentation is dodgy, then the reader starts to feel like the content that's about to come, they're about to absorb, will also be dodgy. So if the presentation is within a reputable format or a familiar format, then the reader's brain is able to absorb your content easily. And that's because we're creatures of habit, and that's because we've come to scaffold or understand what it means to be in middle school, high school, an adult, professional, and so forth. And so as the levels go up, expectations go up. All right, on the left-hand side here, you have your navigation. So you have home, syllabus, modules, grade, and Zoom. These are the essential navigations. And then lastly, you have here your Canvas navigation. So your account, your dashboard, where the classes are, your calendar, your inbox, and the such. Now, it's my understanding that there is another thing here because you are looking at my student view. So when I click on the student view, I get like this test student. So it's not necessarily what you're seeing, but for the most part it is. But I believe that there is another option here. And let me go to this right here. And it's this right here, Pronto, right? Pronto. Uh, and that Pronto is a what you call that? Real time, right? It's real time. It's kind of like a chat or Twitter. So it's a real time communication tool that we can use to address things. If you say, "Oh no, I forgot it was office hours. Can I still join the office hours?" Did I go? Oh yeah, we're going on right now. Join. So that's what the Pronto. Some of the things it can do. All right, great. Now I'm just going to go click through these various links I talked about earlier. So we'll start here. So as you see, the start here leads you to the overview of this week. And each one of these things that we have to accomplish here comes with a link. So you can either click next, or you can just simply go to these links. Okay, so that's what I meant by sort of this linear sequential transition. You just go, okay, I got to read the course syllabus, boom. I got to get myself familiar with the Q&A discussion board, boom. Pre-course assessment, read while we trade, and then internet, and then the discussion. All right, so that's what that's how the layout is for the class. That's how it will be each week. Okay, next let's go to syllabus. All right, so here's your syllabus. Talks about the expectations, and yeah, nothing really unique there. Please read it because it will answer some of those small details that you may have, individual concerns that you may have. Next, let's go to the modules. So the modules is what I mentioned before. It's how the course is broken down. So if you see here, this is week 1. And then these are grayed out because you have to complete week 1 to get to week 2. And as you see, they're quite similar. Overview, summary. And so when we get to week 2, the landing page, I mentioned this earlier, the home page will have week 2 as its landing page. So you won't have to try to navigate to figure out how to get to week 2. Week 2 will be your landing page. So when I click on this, show you week 1's overview. So next week, Monday, when you click on home, you'll see this, week 2. So you won't have to really navigate through the start here, syllabus, trying to get to all the where we are week 2. Week 2 will be its landing page, the landing page. Okay, next up is the course roadmap. So again, I want to just give you a visual. So this is why we trade, what it's about, got NAFTA. So got NAFTA. NAFTA is no longer the trade block. It's North American Free Trade. It's no longer that. It's USMCA. But the learning aspect of this chapter is still the same, and we'll balance out some of the sort of historical content with present day information, but the overview is relevant still today. Yeah. So, and then you go target market and modes of entry. How do we get from here to there? Supply chain management, factor mobility, trade policy, and political economy and international trade. So I believe you get a nice overview of how things work. Okay, next up. That was a course roadmap, student support. Let's just take a look at that. All right, so this is your student support, online resources, additional student support resources, and accessibility resources. Okay. Well, that's inconvenient. So apparently when you do that, it kind of takes you away from, so these homes right here and these links right here are very specific to SMCCD's platform, okay? All right, so we're back to what we're dealing with here. And then lastly here, Canvas. And again, once you get here, it kind of takes you into SMCCD's own platform here. Right. They're very useful, and you know what I would recommend, to tell you the truth here, is I would just right click on these and I would just open them in a new tab. That would make it so that you don't lose this visual. All right. Let's make sure I went over everything on this page. Looks like I did. Okay, so next up, I want to talk about the discussion. Okay, so this is our introductory discussion. Again, this week is just a getting to know you week. Trying to get a baseline understanding of the class and how to drive the conversation moving forward. All right, and so with that said, we need to kind of understand what international means. And for a lot of us, international is a personal thing. You may have an ethnicity, or you may have an affiliation, or you may have a desire or love for a certain region. Then that would be your connotation or your understanding of international. But we have to kind of get above that first, so that we can kind of drill down and satisfy your personal affiliations with the term international. And so that's what this short little video here is going to explain. It just talks about multilateral organizations. There's nothing really big there, but what's important that I need to make sure that everybody hears these terminologies and hears the names of these organizations, and gets a brief understanding of these organizations, so that as we go further on, we start to see other trade agreements within these multilateral organizations. We're not like, oh, you lost me already. I was still trying to figure out what the WTO was. So for the purpose of this course, this is not an econ course, but we do need to get some of the basics. And so that's what this discussion is about. Same with the second video. It's just basically talking about how businesses work in that multilateral space. Okay. And so that's pretty good. And we're going to get a really good base understanding of that. And then from there, we're going to be able to really move along quite comfortably, knowing that you always have a reference point to the basics. Oh, now here's the important part. So every discussion has these prompts, question prompts. So you just you answer these question prompts, and then underneath that, you share your thoughts. So right here where it says reply, you simply click on that and then you reply. Okay. So here's an important note about replying to your question prompts. So when you do your reply, let me see if this thing allows me to do this. Okay. So when you do your reply, it'll show up like this, right? If you like somebody's reply, you can like it. I think it's pretty cool. Now, if you see somebody else has done a reply, it's important that you do your reply with this first reply button, right? The big reply button. This reply button is your reply. And you go, oh yes, I know, I saw the video and it was very informative. And the great part about it is it taught me that there were 3 organizations that I heard on TV all the time, and and people were arguing about them, and I never knew what they were, and now I finally know. Something like that, right? So you put that in there. And then the other half of the assignment here is you have to reply to your classmate, right? So this reply, big one for you. This small one here is for your classmates. So you reply on it and you go, "Hi, test student. I'm glad somebody else is also like me." And they were like, "Wow, I didn't know that was there. I'm looking forward to learning more about how this works and how I fit in the world and how I can make a change in the world." So that second reply is here, okay? Lastly about this is the rubric. Now let me see what this thing does. Okay, great. So you click on the rubric, and so just to let everybody know what a rubric is. A rubric is how the assignment is being graded. Okay, so it's the expectation of the assignment, the rubric. And again, you can always go back to it if you look at your grade or if you look at a comment, and you go, "But I answered. But why did I get this grade? This is not fair." Then we can have a discussion and we can say, okay, well, let's look at the rubric and you tell me, how you fulfill the rubric and how I misinterpreted you fulfilling the rubric, right? Okay, so here is our rubric. So the first 20 points, so I can backtrack and let you know that it's a 50-point assignment, right? So it's broken down 20, 20, 5, and 5 for a total of 50 points. Okay, you get no points if there's no reference to the prompts. So you didn't answer any questions. You saw the thing. You go, "Hey, my name is George, and I like to ride bicycles, and you know, da 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 da." Wait a second, that's got nothing to do with the question. So yes, you replied, you submitted an answer, but it had nothing to do with the question. A minimal reference, you go, "Oh yeah, hi, my name is George. I've been to Brazil. I've been to Brazil several times, and I like how they dance during Carnival." Yeah, wait a second. You may have mentioned a different country, but that really doesn't pertain to the material. So it's incrementally it gets better as you apply more sort of intuitive answering, right? So you see the questions, they're not mind blowing, but they do take you a moment to internalize it, think about something, and then answer it, right? Which is why it's good to visit these questions early. It allows you to, think about them, look at them on Monday, and then, go back, draft something on Tuesday or put it in on Tuesday, and then Wednesday, come back, take a look at who else has answered, answer one of them. If other people are slow, come back Thursday, somebody else answer them, and then boom, you're visiting, you're touching, you just take a look, go away, take a look, go away, and then that way it just keeps it dynamic, keeps it fresh. So for the first question prompts, for this first discussion, it's nothing mind-blowing. It's really just a welcome discussion. But as we move forward, it's really going to take a team. It's going to take your classmates to help you kind of dig and look at different perspectives. And it's very important that we have this engagement because we are in this online space, and we don't want to sacrifice the learning because of the modality. We really want to make sure that we can do this most effectively and most pleasurably. Have some fun with this. So, and that all starts with engagement, and then we can retool and repurpose the site to make sure that it reflects how the class is moving. So that's an important promise for me, is to make sure that the site stays relevant, the content stays relevant with the way the class is moving, with the way people are participating, with the way the content relates to some of the feedback I'm getting from you guys. Here's the second part. You notice it's just as important as the first part. So you answered, and that's great. But just as important is the feedback. So, you get no points if you don't answer. You get little points if you're just saying, "Oh, nice. I like that. Nice pose." That doesn't work. You get half the points if you just answer one person. So, the only person I like in this class is is Linda, or Michael, and then I'm only going to answer that to them, that, or you just like, oh, I forgot to check back in on Friday. Oh, so you're only going to get half the points. You get you answer to two guys, but yet you didn't really talk about the topic, right? And so you answered two, but one of them was to George, and you go, oh yeah, George, I was in Brazil too. Yeah, it is fun. Yeah, man. No, you guys are both pushing each other down the wrong road. And so the responses are just as important as the responses to your classmates are just important as your initial response, because that way we all can engage fruitfully. All right, organization style and tone and grammar. So these two I feel are quite basic. Similar to when we mentioned about the MLA format, we're at a higher level of responsibility when we're doing these college classes. That we're grooming each other to make sure that we're able to communicate fruitfully and productively in the work world. And so by that, you have to start good habits. And so you're not texting. This is not Twitter. This is not, I don't even know what, Instagram. So these are not those platforms, all right? So an academic, but most importantly, it's to mirror a professional environment. It's a professional academic environment, even though it's not a workplace environment. So we need to use that kind of language in how we communicate with each other. Okay, so that's basically it for that. Ooh, what happened there? Close. Yes. All right. Okay. We're doing great. Okay, so let me just go back here. Make sure I covered everything. All right, layout. All right, so I think the layout is pretty much explained. The calendar, I think it's pretty quite obvious. Okay, so now let's go into the. Well, let me do the pre-course assessment. Just take a look at that. So here it is. So this is the pre-course assessments. Just 10 questions long, and all you do is just take the survey. So that's quite simple. Okay. All right, and let me also show you the reader. So here's the link to the reader. You click on it. It opens up a new tab. And here we go. Here's the book, 161 pages. And most of that is just it's kind of fluff and all this for the content. So it's not as massive as you would think. And when we look at let me blow this up here. I hope this is still being viewed. Okay. So we blow this up. You see here, you can print out different pages if you want. So this is what we're doing this week, why we trade. And I'm going to go over that quickly here. So why we trade here, we're talking about quickly differences in technology, differences in resource endowment, differences in demand, economies of scale, and government policies. So technology, as we kind of can see, you have this idea of nations that do low-tech export. They may do raw materials, that they may be sort of secondary stage materials. So they're not getting the coltan or the cobalt out of the ground, but they may be processing it, or let's say coffee. They're not getting the beans from the plantation. They're roasting it, and then from there, Um, they're moving it over to a nation that's closer to the consumer, and then the consumer is doing sort of tertiary tasks. You know, they're packaging it, they're promoting it, they're costing it, and doing all these different things. And so the difference in technology and promotes trade. So if you know we if America were to do a lot of the plantation on the beans, the cost will be relatively high compared to a nation that you know they get that more land space. They have a lower pay scale, and so they can produce more beans. They can use more of their labor resource to produce that bean. Whereas in America, we'd have less labor source, less people willing to do that job. And so then that's one of the reasons why we trade. So that's technology. And so um, they may want to have cell phones, right? And so they're not going to even try to build a cell phone. They're just going to do their beans, and some other country would do the cell phones. So it's these benefits that causes that resource endowment again. You know, resources, land, labor, capital, entrepreneurship. You know, yeah, entrepreneurship or engineer, entrepreneurship is the same thing. So basically, what that means is there an environment that fosters entrepreneurship? You know, like Silicon Valley or something like that, you know, New York or things like that. So not all countries have this cluster of businesses, and these clusters of businesses allow for innovation, and they in turn lower the costs of innovation. So that's resource endowment. Other ones, land, labor, capital. So there's a difference across borders, which is why people trade. Demand, uh, you know, they may be able to do a lot of a certain kind of product because of their endowment, but they may not have enough consumers to gain or to profit from their production. Economies of scale, this is the notion where if you do specialize in a certain good or service and you become bigger and bigger, the cost for additional input decreases, and you have the output increases. And so the bigger you get, the more kind of effective you can be, the more you can kind of dominate a certain sector. And so economies of scale kind of, you know, as you get bigger and bigger, your costs go down and down. And then you get to a point where you're at your max, and one additional input is either equal to your output or is more expensive. And then you have diseconomies of scale, right? So it's kind of this U shape. Um, and so, you know, people trade because they've specialized in something, and they got really big at it, really good at it, and their costs are much cheaper. And so that's one of the reasons why you would, you know, if you're a supplier, or if you're doing a business and you're trying to look for a supplier, you would look for a supplier that, you know, has economies of scale. So you know, okay, well, these guys are probably going to get a good price for these things because they're so good at it, and they've been doing it. So, you know, we can look at China and their manufacturing. We can look at India and their sort of small item manufacturing. So, you know, when you create a product, it's usually small little pieces come from different parts of the world, and then they kind of group together in a location, usually closest to the consumer. And then so the supplier would, you know, the business would look for a supplier that has that economy of scale. So if you manufacture, if you're doing, let's say you want to build a robotic arm or something like that, or you want to build a better chair, or you want to build um, a drum set or something, that, you know, you would look for suppliers that offer the best price, and usually it's the ones that have this economy of scale. So you're looking for these screws. You can find them cheaper in India, or this certain kind of joint or thing that goes together like this. I don't know, you know, specific to your business. You can find it in these places that specialized to have economies of scale and find it cheaper. And then now government policies. You want to also look for countries that are friendly to trade. A very interesting thing here is what's recently is going on between the U.S. and China in terms of how they're seeing social media services, how that trade, because the services is a trade as well. You trade in services just as you trade in cars and hard goods. And we're seeing now that there's a back and forth with China between social media services. And so I think the latest here is, I think it was LinkedIn or somebody left China. And so for them, they have to find another market. So that market is not, that the policies of that market is not good for them. So now they have to find another market. They have to develop that market and, have strategies to enter that market, build in that market. And it's very costly, but they thought it's significant enough, or either the government said, Chinese government said, no, we want you out. This is too much of a competition for our locally homegrown businesses. So, they were forced to leave. And so these are some of the things that happened in trade, and this is where the government comes in. Similar to when we had the peak of the trade war on this side, and then the government was putting down tariffs and quotas, and so businesses had to think, my goodness, where am I going to get this part to help complete my business, or things like that. All right, let's go and take a look at competitive advantage. So competitive advantage is this notion of resources. So we all have limited every nation has a limited resource. All the sort of manufacturers and suppliers in that nation, they have a limited resource. So let's take the bean example, right? So let's say Brazil does beans very well. They have a high labor resource, and they can devote a lot of their resources to the bean. But they don't do very good. Let's see. Let's say jeans, right? They don't have the looms and the machines, or they're kind of antiquated. It takes a lot of workers to work their looms and their machines. And so the productivity they have in jeans is much less than a country that has higher technology. So let's say Mexico, the government invested in really good machines, subsidized their machines. And so they're very good at getting a lot of jeans out with relatively less labor. So Mexico and Brazil, well, they'll say, well, we can supply you with the beans, and you can supply us with jeans, right? Even though they could still make jeans, they get more out of their resources if they concentrate on beans. Same thing with Mexico. Mexico says, well, that's a good point. Right now we've had a couple bad spells with our crops. We're at a bad crop cycle. It's going to take a while to get our soil to be proficient enough to handle a crop such as a bean. The amount of years to turn over that soil to get it healthy enough to do beans would kind of leave us out of the bean market altogether. So it makes sense. We'll take your beans. You have our jeans. So even though they both can do both things, one has a competitive advantage. The other one has another competitive advantage than the other. Okay. Let's see. Now, absolute advantage. So this notion of absolute advantage is where one country has an absolute advantage in both products. Again, let's take a look at Brazil and Mexico. Brazil says, we actually just did an amazing renovation. We had new government policies, and we subsidized a lot of that industry. We paid a lot of attention to the jean making industry, textile industry, and we want to make sure, just for our national security, we want to make sure that we're able to have our own homegrown textile industry. So they actually have an absolute advantage in both. So, Mexico goes, but I see your point. I see your point. However, the amount of time it's going to take you to get your population to learn how to work these new machines and to manage the consumers so that they're used to the higher prices that it'll take for these machines in your country, because you have to pay back all that money that you spent subsidizing that machine, might take a long time. So even though you have benefit of doing both, I still feel, as a government here, we still feel that there's room for us to trade, because that industry is, it's a nascent, it's small, it's growing, it's developing. And during that time, we'll have a trade agreement for 5 years where we slowly, increase the amount of genes, or we'll decrease the amount of genes we send to you, and we'll measure out that volume and the quotas of our inputs and exports, so that it benefits both of us. For us, it gives us time for the soil to turn and become natural and help us grow our bean business. And for you, it gives time for your workforce to learn the machines, your consumers to get used to various price fluctuations, and you can market that, as homegrown Brazilian genes. So even though one has an absolute advantage, it can do both. Trade is still good because it lowers the costs for the consumer, and it manages the suppliers' expectations so that they can either take the lead or they can retract, because it gives them time to see what this new landscape is like. And we're gonna look at balance of trade, economy, export, goods, input, opportunity cost. So the opportunity cost is that whole notion about input and output, how much input it takes to get that output of good. And as you play with that, in terms of your resource, how much labor and capital are you using? And if you use one more input of capital, how much input of labor does it take to manage that increase in capacity? Opportunity cost, that's all that is, of moving your industry and your economy around. Productivity, resource, service, trade deficit, trade surplus. So a balance of trade is looking at Mexico and Brazil. So if the net balance, let's say everything that they trade, Brazil could have a negative balance of trade. That means they import more from Mexico than they export to Mexico, and Mexico could have a surplus. That means they export more than they import. So on the face of that, it's not necessarily what they call a zero-sum game. That means for me to win, you have to lose. It's not necessarily how it works. The economy when you look at an economy, it includes a lot of different elements. So it includes the balance of trade, but it also includes consumer spending. It also includes suppliers, how they do. So, and a lot of government functions, how tax government functions, how it does. We'll talk about that, but I don't want to go quickly over that. But so the whole economy has a lot of moving parts, a lot of pieces, right? So the balance of trade is not necessarily the only indicator. What is important and what I'm saying right now is it kind of harks back to what I mentioned earlier. We talk about the fact that the consumer has a part in the economy, just as the supplier has a part, just as a balance of trade has a part. So I think that's the important thing here. So that is basically it. So there is this thing called the trade ruler game. It was really cool. It's an online game. It's not an assignment because I'm not sure if it's still up. I used to use it. It's great because you can literally do that. You can trade with different countries and you can see what happens. And so the great part about that, about this game, is that it actually brings in real life ramifications to trade. So my examples were sort of in isolation. I was talking about, these two benevolent rulers dictating how things work. You will take my genes, I will take your beans. It doesn't work like that. So as you work with the trade, the balance of trade and different policies, you have opportunity costs. You have to give up something for something else in terms of your resources. And the population will let you know whether or not they like that. And so it's a lot to do with that. And so politically, if they say, well, we didn't like the fact that you spend all those monies on those looms and those gene machines, we wanted you to spend money on, I don't know, something else, something that they can see readily. We need more hospitals, we need more of this, we want to see more of this in our neighborhoods. All right, so that becomes a political threat, and then the government has to deal with that. And so they may say, okay, you know what, we're not doing any more of these looms, or they may have to say, well, you know what, we don't care, we have to do it this way for the economy. And then, but so all in all, that might cause some friction politically. And so the good thing about the trade ruler game, it kind of showed you that trade is not in isolation. It comes with real life ramifications, and individuals and collectives and networks have pressure and have ways of applying uh, uh, what they want to see happen in the economy, and how they want to see the economy advance vis-a-vis another economy. What's most important here, a little time check here. Just see here. What's most important to know is that trade happens on all levels, even in the individual level, even now when you're in school. Like if you see something that you think can make other people's lives better, make your life better, then think about that. And then also know that um, as humans, we're pretty much the same everywhere we go. What is different is the environment, right? So then you have to isolate, okay, what other environment would my idea work? And your idea might work best in a different environment, even though you saw a need and it helped you in this environment. You might say, well, it's just so hard here. It's so competitive. And I don't think the government really, well, by that I mean your state or your city or your municipality or any kind of support network, your church or whatever, any kind of support network that allow you to advance your business. You don't think you'll get that support, then you can look at a different market. You go, oh, I'm sure that they would love this product over there, or they would love this service over there. And so that is trade. It benefits the global economy, and it's it's how this stuff is happening. So that's going to be it for today. Again, you can contact me whenever, and we'll have our next meeting. And these things are recorded, so you can just take a listen to this recording. And if there is a question you have on the recording, contact me there as well. All right. Have a great week. Okay. Yes, you will receive. Okay.